Ma'am, you smell terrible. You need to leave this plane immediately. Those were the exact words that silenced the entire first-class cabin of Skyward Airlines Flight 456 on that cold February morning. A lead flight attendant, Mary Smith, stood towering over Jennifer Williams, her voice sharp, her tone dripping with authority. And for a moment, you could feel the entire plane holding its breath. Jennifer, a 52-year-old black woman on her way to Dallas for a charity event, looked up slowly, disbelief flashing in her eyes. That was the moment everything changed. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more real-life dramas. Now, let me take you back to that morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, where a simple flight turned into a battle for dignity and justice. Jennifer had boarded quietly, ticket in hand, settling into her economy seat 15B with a soft smile and a book about community building. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't flashy. Just a woman with a big heart, heading to organize a fundraiser for underserved kids, a program she'd built from scratch that raised over $50,000 last year alone. The cabin was packed, about 150 passengers, coats stuffed under seats, bags squeezed into overhead bins, and the smell of coffee mixing with recycled air. Jennifer sat peacefully, unaware of the storm about to hit her. Then came Karen Martinez, the passenger seated beside her in 15C, a 50-year-old white woman in pearls and a tailored coat, the kind who always seems to find something to complain about. From the moment she sat down, Karen made loud sighs, wrinkled her nose dramatically, and began waving her hand as if she were clearing smoke. "Excuse me?" she called out sharply, catching Mary Smith's attention as she walked past with her clipboard. "Yes, ma'am?" Mary stopped, her voice professional but already impatient. Karen pointed directly at Jennifer. "This woman smells awful. It's like body odor mixed with cheap perfume. I can't sit here. In fact, 5 of us are affected back here. She needs to go. Off the plane." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Passengers turned, some raising eyebrows, others whispering. Jennifer froze, her book still in her lap. She looked at Karen calmly and said, softly but firmly, "Ma'am, I showered this morning. I don't smell bad. I'm not bothering anyone." Karen scoffed loudly, turning to Mary. "Don't lie to me. It's disgusting. Do something." Mary leaned in, sniffing the air theatrically, exaggerating every move for everyone to see. Then, straightening up, she announced loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "Ma'am, we take passenger comfort very seriously. You'll need to deboard the plane." Gasps echoed through the nearby rows. Jennifer's head snapped up, her calm cracking just slightly. "I paid for this seat. I've done nothing wrong. This is ridiculous." A younger flight attendant, Susan Miller, the trainee, shifted uncomfortably nearby. She hesitated, whispering softly, "Mary, maybe we should check first. I don't smell anything." But Mary turned on her sharply, her eyes cold. "Stay out of this. Trainee, learn to follow protocol." Then, without another word, she tapped her headset and called into the intercom. "Captain Evans, we have a disruptive passenger in row 15, requesting support." Moments later, the cockpit door opened and out came Captain Jack Evans, a tall man with graying hair, his uniform perfectly pressed. He walked down the aisle, expression stern. "What's the issue?" Mary spoke first, her tone firm and authoritative. "Body odor complaint. Captain, multiple passengers reported it, and she's refusing to cooperate." Jack nodded instantly, without question, without investigation. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Jennifer, "for the safety and comfort of all passengers, I'm going to have to ask you to exit the aircraft." Jennifer stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious? Over a false complaint? I've done nothing wrong." Karen smirked beside her, crossing her arms. "Good luck arguing with the captain. she whispered under her breath. Jack signaled to ground security, and within seconds, Jerry Parker, the on-duty security guard, appeared, large frame filling the narrow aisle. "Ma'am," he said flatly, reaching for Jennifer's arm. "I need you to come with me." That was the moment Jennifer decided she wouldn't be silent. She pulled out her phone, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning inside her. "This is discrimination," she said calmly, holding her ground. "I'm calling my husband." Karen laughed softly under her breath, whispering just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Good luck with that." Jerry tightened his grip, saying sternly, "Ma'am, we need to move now." Jennifer took a deep breath, tears threatening but never falling, and allowed herself to be escorted out. She held her head high, walking down the aisle slowly. As murmurs filled the cabin, a few passengers shook their heads, whispering in disapproval. Others pulled out their phones, recording everything. Among them was an older gentleman seated across the aisle, a retired veteran named Jerry Parker, no relation to the guard, who muttered under his breath, "This ain't right. This ain't right at all." As Jennifer stepped off the plane, the terminal went silent. People stared, confused and curious, some nodding in sympathy, others pretending not to see. Jennifer turned to the guard and said firmly, "I paid $450 for this ticket. I followed every rule, and you just dragged me off this plane over a lie." Jerry shrugged, his voice cold, detached. Orders from the captain. "Take it up with customer service." Mary followed closely behind, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. "You caused a scene," she said bluntly. "We can't have that kind of disruption." Susan, the young trainee, hovered nearby, her voice small but trembling with frustration. "Mary." She didn't smell bad. "I checked. This isn't right." Mary shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Not your call. Susan, back inside the plane." Karen Martinez leaned back in her seat, smiling smugly, adjusting her designer coat like a queen claiming victory. But not everyone was silent. That same passenger, Jerry the veteran, stood up, pointing down the aisle. "That woman wasn't bothering anyone. You all saw it. This smells like racism to me." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin, tension growing heavier by the second. Captain Jack, already back in the cockpit, announced over the intercom, "We're resolving a minor issue. Folks, departure in 10 minutes. Meanwhile, out in the terminal, Jennifer sat on a bench, phone pressed to her ear. "Justin," she whispered, her voice shaking but controlled. "They kicked me off. They said I smelled," Karen Martinez complained, and the crew backed her without question. "It's humiliating." On the other end of the line, Justin Baker, the CEO of Skyward Airlines, paused in stunned silence before replying, his voice low but filled with fury. "Stay right there. Jennifer, do not move. I'm coming." And in that moment, Jennifer wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and waited. She didn't know it yet, but within the hour, her quiet call would set off a chain of events that would shake this airline to its core. The gate area buzzed with tension as Jennifer stood there, clutching her handbag tightly, her breathing uneven but her posture unbroken. Her belongings had been tossed into a pile at her feet, like she was some kind of problem to be removed rather than a paying passenger. People in the terminal whispered and stared, some shaking their heads in quiet sympathy, others avoiding her eyes completely. Jerry Parker, the security guard, stood rigidly nearby, arms folded across his chest, refusing to meet Jennifer's gaze as though he knew deep down this was wrong, but couldn't bring himself to admit it. "This isn't right," Jennifer said softly but firmly, her voice carrying the weight of years spent fighting to be seen, heard, and respected. "I paid $450 for that ticket. I've followed every rule. You're throwing me out over a lie." Jerry shifted his stance uncomfortably, but muttered flatly, "Orders from the captain. Take it up with customer service." Jennifer stared at him, her jaw tightening, and turned away before the anger bubbling inside spilled over. A few feet away, Mary Smith, the lead flight attendant, strode into the terminal with her clipboard in hand, her face a mask of authority she wore like armor. "You caused a disruption," she said sharply, her tone carrying just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear. "We can't have people refusing to comply with crew instructions." Jennifer faced her calmly, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning inside her. "I didn't refuse anything. Mary." I was sitting in my seat, quietly, until your passenger decided she had a problem with me. That's the truth. Mary's lips pressed into a thin line, but before she could respond, Susan Miller, the young trainee flight attendant, stepped forward cautiously, wringing her hands. "Mary," she whispered, almost pleading. "I checked earlier. She didn't smell bad. None of us did. This doesn't feel right." Mary turned to her sharply, eyes cold and unforgiving. "Susan, you're new. You're here to follow protocol, not question my judgment." Susan hesitated, glancing at Jennifer. Guilt etched across her face. I think we made a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Back inside the plane, Karen Martinez, the passenger who'd started all this, sat smugly in 15C, crossing her arms and leaning back in her seat as though she'd won a personal victory. She tilted her head toward the woman sitting behind her and whispered loudly enough for several rows to hear. Finally, some peace and quiet. Some people just don't belong in certain spaces, you know? The woman behind her frowned but said nothing, while other passengers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances. Not everyone was silent, though. The other Jerry Parker, the retired Army veteran seated across the aisle, stood up, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the cabin noise. "That was uncalled for," he said firmly, his hand gripping the headrest in front of him. That lady wasn't bothering a soul. I sat right across from her. She was quiet, respectful, polite. "This smells like something else entirely. And it stinks worse than anything you're accusing her of." Several passengers murmured their agreement, nodding slowly, while others raised their phones, capturing videos of the entire exchange. Susan, still standing near the open cabin door, overheard Jerry's words and swallowed hard, her courage growing despite Mary's icy glare. "He's right," Susan said softly, looking around at the other attendants. She wasn't doing anything wrong, but Mary ignored her entirely, turning instead to Captain Jack Evans, who had returned to the cockpit after ordering Jennifer's removal. "Captain, the passenger has been deboarded," Mary reported crisply. "We can prepare for departure." Jack's voice came crackling through the intercom moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've resolved a minor issue with passenger seating. We'll be pushing back shortly." That single statement deepened the growing divide inside the cabin. Passengers on one side growing restless, whispering about fairness and discrimination, while others simply wanted to leave the chaos behind, out in the terminal. Jennifer lowered herself into a chair by the window, staring out at the runway where planes taxied in the cold February air. She took a deep breath and pressed her phone against her ear, dialing Justin. When he answered, his voice was calm but razor-sharp, the kind of controlled tone that only came when his anger was boiling beneath the surface. "Jennifer," he said softly, "tell me exactly what happened." She explained everything. The false complaint, Mary's exaggerated theatrics, Jack's refusal to listen, and Jerry dragging her out like she was a threat to everyone on board. Justin didn't interrupt once, but Jennifer could hear the weight of his breathing on the other end. Slow and deliberate. When she finished, his response was short, powerful, and final. "Stay put. Do not leave that gate. I'm coming. And I'm bringing Frank and Gary with me. They're about to find out who they just humiliated. Jennifer's chest tightened at his words, but she kept her composure, inhaling deeply to steady herself. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been quietly shoved aside, dismissed, or embarrassed because someone else decided they didn't belong. As she waited, Susan quietly slipped into the terminal, standing awkwardly beside Jennifer, fidgeting with her hands. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she whispered softly, her eyes avoiding Mary's watchful glare from inside the cabin. "I didn't think it was fair what they did to you. I should have spoken up louder." Jennifer smiled faintly, appreciating the young woman's courage, and said gently, "Thank you, Susan. It's not your fault, but it means something that you came out here, back on the plane." Jerry the veteran shook his head, muttering to the passenger beside him. "You can't just treat folks like this and expect no one to speak up. I've seen this before, overseas, even in uniform. It always starts small until somebody draws the line." The woman next to him nodded, her phone still recording. "People need to see this," she whispered. "The world needs to know what's happening," while passengers argued and whispered inside. The tension outside only grew heavier. A small crowd gathered near the gate windows, watching Jennifer and the security guard like it was a standoff. Jerry, the guard, stood stiffly by the boarding door, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of so many eyes on him. He shifted his radio nervously, trying to avoid contact with Jennifer, Susan, or the growing crowd of passengers in the terminal who were beginning to ask questions aloud. What happened? Why'd they kick her off? Did she really do something wrong? The whispers spread quickly, like sparks catching dry leaves. Within minutes, you could feel the energy shift. This was no longer just Jennifer's fight. This was becoming something bigger. People were pulling out their phones, uploading videos, and hashtags were already starting to circulate online, though Jennifer had no idea yet. Inside the cockpit, Jack adjusted his headset, his voice sharp with impatience as he called Mary forward. "Let's get this bird in the air," he said. But Susan, who had returned reluctantly to the cabin, leaned closer to Mary and whispered, "I still think we should check the facts. What if this blows back on us?" Mary exhaled harshly, lowering her voice but keeping her words cold. "Listen, rookie, do yourself a favor. Keep your mouth shut and your head down. This isn't your fight." Susan swallowed her fear and stepped back. But deep inside, she knew this was wrong, and that knowledge weighed on her heavier than any uniform she wore. Meanwhile, Jennifer sat quietly in the terminal, hands folded in her lap, her breathing steady now as she repeated Justin's words in her mind. "Stay put. Don't move. I'm coming." And as the clock ticked, the sound of approaching footsteps and rising murmurs from the far end of the terminal signaled a shift in the air. Something big was coming, and none of the crew had any idea that within the next few minutes, the balance of power on this flight was about to flip upside down. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted the moment the sliding doors at the far end opened and Justin Baker stepped through, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure against the crowd. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his presence commanding without effort, flanked by his loyal assistant Frank Nelson on the right and airline director Gary Young on the left. Conversations hushed, whispers rippled across the gate area, and heads turned as people instinctively knew someone important had arrived. Jennifer stood slowly, her eyes locking on her husband's, relief washing over her features for the first time since this nightmare began. Justin crossed the terminal in long, purposeful strides, his expression calm but his eyes like steel, the kind of quiet fury that made people step aside without a word. Frank's phone was in his hand, rapidly firing off instructions. while Gary's face was grim, already anticipating the fallout to come. "Where is she?" Justin asked, his voice low but heavy with authority as he reached Jennifer, pulling her gently into his arms. "I'm right here," she whispered, her voice shaking despite her composure, for a brief moment. He held her close, his jaw tightening as she murmured, "They kicked me off. Justin said I smelled that woman." Her eyes flicked toward Karen Martinez, who sat smugly inside the plane, watching through the open cabin door. Justin's face hardened instantly, and when he looked up, his expression had shifted into something colder, sharper, more dangerous. He turned to Gary, his voice measured but unyielding. "Ground the plane." Gary hesitated only for a second before nodding quickly. "Understood." Within seconds. Frank was on the phone with operations control, his voice crisp and precise. "Hold flight 456 at gate C12. No pushback clearance until further notice. Inside the aircraft." Captain Jack Evans's headset crackled to life, and his irritation was immediate. "Operations. Why are we grounded?" "We're ready for departure," Frank responded flatly. "CEO override. Captain, hold position." The silence on the other end said everything. Back in the terminal, Justin's gaze swept across the crew members assembled near the boarding door. His voice was calm, deliberate, but it carried a weight that made even seasoned staff members straighten instinctively. "Who's in charge of this flight?" Mary Smith stepped forward, clipboard in hand, her expression professional but her posture tense. "I am, sir," she said quickly, not yet realizing who she was speaking to. "We had a passenger issue. There were multiple complaints about body odor affecting several rows. Per protocol, we removed her for the comfort of other guests." Justin studied her face, his silence stretching just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably under his gaze. "Your name," he said finally, his tone neutral but cold. "Mary Smith. Lead flight attendant," she replied, her voice faltering slightly. Justin nodded slowly, as though committing her name to memory, then turned his attention to Captain Jack Evans, who had emerged from the cabin, confusion written across his face. "And you?" Justin asked evenly. Jack straightened his uniform. "Captain Jack Evans. Sir, we followed standard procedures. Safety and passenger comfort always come first." "Passenger comfort," Justin repeated softly, almost to himself. Before his eyes narrowed, whose comfort exactly? "Captain, because from where I stand, you allowed my wife to be humiliated, dragged off her seat, and treated like a problem to be removed without a single shred of evidence. Did anyone verify these claims before escalating?" Mary glanced at Karen, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat but quickly regained her composure, raising her chin defiantly. "It was real," Karen said loudly from inside the cabin, forcing her voice into the confrontation. "I know what I smelled. Ask anyone around me." At that moment, Susan Miller, the trainee flight attendant who had been quietly standing in the back, took a deep breath and stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Sir," she began, addressing Justin directly. "I checked earlier. There was no smell. No one else complained except Ms. Martinez. I told Mary that, but she told me to stay quiet." A ripple went through the crowd, and passengers watching from nearby gasped quietly, several lifting their phones higher to record every word. Justin turned his gaze back to Mary, his tone suddenly sharper. "You ignored a member of your crew who tried to give you facts and chose instead to act on a single passenger's bias. That is not procedure. That is discrimination." Mary opened her mouth to respond, but her voice caught in her throat as the weight of the room pressed down on her. Behind her, Jerry Parker, the retired Army veteran passenger, stood up from his seat inside the cabin and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He's right. I sat 2 rows across. Jennifer wasn't bothering anybody. She was quiet, polite, respectful. This was about something else. and everyone here knows it. More murmurs erupted among the passengers inside, and several began calling out in agreement. "Yeah, we saw it too. She didn't do anything wrong. This isn't right." Karen turned in her seat, her voice rising defensively. "Oh, please, you're all just taking her side because she's crying now." A woman in the row behind Karen leaned forward sharply and snapped, "No, we're taking her side because we have eyes and ears. We watched you complain about her before the flight even started." Justin raised a hand slightly, silencing the crowd instantly with nothing more than his presence. He turned to Gary, his voice calm but commanding. "I want statements from every passenger who witnessed this. Now." Gary nodded, already moving toward the nearest group of passengers with a small team of operations staff gathering testimonies. Frank's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. "Sir, we're trending on social media already. Someone's live streaming from inside the cabin." Justin exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he processed the information. "Good," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "Let the world see how we handle this." Mary's face paled as the realization of who stood before her began to sink in. "Sir, forgive me. I didn't realize she was your—" "Stop," Justin interrupted firmly, holding up a hand. "This isn't about who she's married to. This is about basic respect for a paying customer. Something you seem to have forgotten the meaning of." Jennifer, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying more strength than before. "This isn't the first time." "Justin," she said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It happens to people like me all the time. It just never makes the headlines." Justin's expression softened for a moment as he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, then turned back to the crew. "That ends today," he said simply, his voice steady but resolute. "Not on my airline. Not ever again." Susan's shoulders eased slightly, relief flooding her expression, while passengers inside began clapping softly, the sound growing louder as more people joined in. Karen sank lower into her seat, her confidence evaporating under the mounting backlash. Captain Jack tried to speak, but Justin silenced him with a look so sharp that words died in his throat. Frank leaned in quietly, handing Justin a tablet displaying preliminary reports. "Sir, we've confirmed inconsistencies in Mary's incident log," Frank murmured. "No corroborating passenger complaints, just Martinez." Justin nodded once, his tone clipped. "Good. Document everything. Nobody leaves until this is resolved." The atmosphere around Gate C-12 was electric now, passengers on their phones, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. But beneath the chaos was a growing sense of reckoning, and as Justin turned back toward Mary, Jack, and Karen, his next words would decide their fate. The conference room near Gate C-12 was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights, but the air felt heavy, almost electric, as if everyone inside knew the weight of what was about to happen. Justin Baker stood at the head of the table, his presence filling the room without raising his voice, his sharp navy suit immaculate, his expression unreadable but his eyes cold with restrained fury. Jennifer sat to his right, her hands folded calmly on the table, her posture dignified despite the humiliation she had endured minutes earlier. Across from them sat Mary Smith, Captain Jack Evans, security guard Jerry Parker, and Karen Martinez, the passenger whose complaint had ignited this firestorm, behind Justin. Frank Nelson stood with a tablet in hand, while Gary Young, the airline director, paced quietly, already compiling witness statements. Susan Miller, the young trainee flight attendant, sat near the door, her nervous energy palpable, but her gaze never wavered from Jennifer, as if silently vowing to back her up no matter the cost. Justin finally spoke, his tone calm but layered with authority, each word deliberate and sharp as a blade. Let me make one thing clear before we begin. This isn't about who Jennifer is to me. This is about the fact that one of our paying passengers was humiliated, accused without evidence, and physically removed from a flight she had every right to be on. That is unacceptable. Mary shifted in her seat, trying to maintain composure, but her voice faltered when she finally spoke. Sir, I was following procedure. I received a complaint from Miss Martinez and... Justin cut her off instantly, his voice firm but steady. Procedure does not involve dragging someone off a plane without confirmation. Mary, procedure involves facts. And so far, I've seen none from you. Karen crossed her arms defensively, leaning back in her chair. I don't care who she's married to, she said loudly, ignoring the tension in the room. I know what I smelled, and 5 other people agreed with me at that. Gary Young stopped pacing, his voice measured but unyielding. We've interviewed every passenger within 3 rows of you. Ms. Martinez. Not one corroborated your claim. In fact, several passengers stated on record that they saw you making remarks about Jennifer before boarding even began. Karen's face flushed red as she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, Jerry Parker, the security guard, spoke up for the first time, his deep voice quiet but steady. Sir, I was called in under the impression that the situation was verified. I shouldn't have grabbed her arm. I should have asked questions. Justin turned his gaze on him, not unkindly but firmly. You had an obligation to uphold our policies. Jerry, blind obedience isn't protection. It's negligence, and negligence has consequences. Across the table, Captain Jack Evans straightened in his seat, his tone defensive as he folded his arms. With all due respect, Sir, I backed my crew. That's what captains do. We prioritize safety and passenger comfort. Justin's eyes locked on him, sharp and unblinking. Safety isn't the issue here. Captain, discrimination is, and in your rush to back your crew, you failed to protect one of our passengers. That is a failure of leadership, not a demonstration of it. The room was silent again, the weight of his words sinking deep. Then Jennifer spoke, her voice calm but powerful, cutting through the tension like glass breaking. This isn't about me, she said softly, but her words carried across the room with quiet strength. This is about every person who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong because of who they are, how they look, or where they come from. You didn't see me, Mary. You didn't hear me, Captain. You didn't think I deserved the same respect you would have given someone else. That's what hurts the most. Susan shifted in her seat, her eyes glassy as she finally found her voice. She's right, she said, her tone steady despite her shaking hands. I was there. I checked. There was no smell. Mary told me to stay quiet, but I can't do that anymore. What happened wasn't fair. A murmur rippled through the small crowd gathered just outside the glass walls of the conference room. Passengers and off-duty employees watching the confrontation unfold. Frank glanced down at his tablet and whispered something to Justin, who gave a slight nod before speaking again, his voice even colder now. Mary, I reviewed the incident log you submitted. It contains fabricated statements. There are references to multiple passenger complaints that do not exist. Do you want to explain that? Mary's face drained of color, her composure unraveling as she struggled to respond. I assumed. You assumed, Justin repeated flatly, leaning forward slightly, his hands braced on the table. You assumed you knew the truth without verifying it. And because of that, you embarrassed and traumatized a customer in front of 150 people. Karen shifted uncomfortably, muttering under her breath. I told you it was real. Justin turned sharply, his gaze pinning her where she sat. Ms. Martinez, This isn't your courtroom. You made a claim. It was unfounded. You escalated this situation unnecessarily, and you owe Jennifer and everyone else on that flight an apology." Karen scoffed, her arrogance slipping. "I'm not apologizing. I know what I smelled," before anyone could respond. The door opened, and one of Gary's assistants stepped inside, handing him a folder. Gary opened it quickly and looked up, his voice crisp as he read from the document. "Sir, we've reviewed cabin surveillance. There's audio of Ms. Martinez mocking Jennifer before boarding, making comments about her cheap perfume and questioning why people like her are in premium boarding lanes. This wasn't about body odor. This was about bias." A sharp gasp went up from the people outside. Their phones raised as they recorded every word. Mary's shoulders sagged, and Captain Jack looked away, unable to meet Jennifer's gaze. Justin let the silence linger for a moment before speaking again, his voice quiet but razor sharp. "I want everyone in this room to understand something," he said, his gaze sweeping slowly from Mary to Jack to Jerry, and finally resting on Karen. "This isn't just about today. This is about what we stand for as a company. We are entrusted with people's safety, their dignity, and their trust every time they step onto one of our planes. And today, you broke that trust." He straightened, buttoning his jacket, his calm presence radiating command. "As of this moment," he said firmly, his words carrying finality, "all responsible parties will be relieved of duty pending immediate review." The announcement hit the room like thunder. Mary's face went pale, Jack's jaw clenched, and Jerry lowered his head in shame. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but quickly realized no one was on her side anymore. Outside the glass walls, passengers began clapping softly, the sound growing louder and spreading through the gate area until the entire terminal seemed to hum with quiet approval. Jennifer sat silently through it all, her fingers lightly intertwined in her lap, her strength radiating without a single word. As Justin placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, the look in his eyes said everything. This wasn't over yet. There were still policies to review, statements to collect, and decisions to make. But one thing was certain. By the time this was finished, Skyward Airlines would never operate the same way again. The tension inside the conference room cracked like glass under pressure when Justin Baker finally rose from his chair, his voice calm but layered with authority that left no room for debate. "Enough," he said simply, his tone steady and commanding, cutting through the murmur of whispers outside the glass walls. "This ends now." He turned to Gary Young, the airline director, and spoke without hesitation. Effective immediately, Mary Smith, Captain Jack Evans, and Security Officer Jerry Parker are relieved of duty pending termination. Escort them off the premises and revoke their access to Skyward systems. The room fell silent. Mary's mouth opened, but no sound came out, her clipboard trembling in her hands as if it might slip through her fingers. "Sir, please. I've worked here for 20 years, she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. Justin's expression remained firm, his tone steady but devoid of malice. And in those 20 years. "Mary, you should have learned one lesson above all else. Every passenger deserves dignity. Today, you failed that lesson. You failed this company, and you failed yourself." Captain Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I was supporting my crew," he said sharply, his voice defensive, trying to hold on to control that had already slipped through his fingers. "I trusted her judgment. That's what captains do." Justin turned slowly, his gaze unyielding. "And what leaders do." "Captain, is question when something doesn't feel right. Blind loyalty is not leadership. It's negligence. You failed to protect a passenger under your care, and for that, there are consequences." Jerry Parker, the security guard, said nothing at all. He stared at the floor, His broad shoulders slumped, regret written plainly across his face. I shouldn't have grabbed her, he muttered softly, more to himself than anyone else. I should have asked questions first. Justin paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air, then addressed the room as a whole. Skyward Airlines is trusted by millions of passengers every year. People step onto our planes believing they'll be safe, respected, and treated fairly. That trust is everything. Today, you broke it. Gary stepped forward, motioning for the dismissed employees to follow him. Mary hesitated, her face pale, tears welling up in her eyes, but she said nothing more. Jack clenched his jaw and walked out stiffly, his pride wounded, but his authority stripped. Jerry followed silently, his footsteps heavy and slow, as if carrying the weight of his choices on his back. Karen Martinez, the passenger who started it all, sat frozen in her chair, gripping the armrests tightly, her earlier arrogance gone. Justin's gaze shifted to her, sharp but controlled. Ms. Martinez, he said evenly, you are permanently banned from Skyward Airlines for instigating a baseless complaint and disrupting operations. Her jaw dropped, her voice shaking as she sputtered. You can't do that. Justin didn't flinch. I just did. Security will escort you out. You may pursue other travel options. Karen stood abruptly, muttering angrily under her breath as she stormed out, the murmurs of nearby passengers following her like a shadow of shame. Outside the glass room, a growing crowd of travelers had gathered near Gate C-12, their phones raised, filming every moment. When word spread that the lead flight attendant, captain, and security officer had been dismissed, a wave of applause erupted from passengers both inside the terminal and on the plane. The sound filled the gate, raw and unrestrained, a rare moment of unity among strangers. Justin turned to Jennifer, his voice softening as he placed a hand over hers. It's over now, he said quietly, but Jennifer shook her head gently, her voice steady though her eyes shimmered with restrained emotion. No, Justin, this isn't over. This happened because people like me are still judged before we're even seen. I just want it to mean something for the next person. Justin nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful, his mind already turning toward the reforms he knew needed to happen. He looked over at Gary. We're not just cleaning house today, he said firmly. We're changing policies. Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, no exceptions. Every single incident involving passenger removal will require video verification and approval from operations. No more unchecked authority. Gary nodded immediately, already making notes, his face resolute. Susan Miller, the young trainee, stepped forward cautiously, her voice quiet but clear. Sir, she said, glancing nervously between Jennifer and Justin, I want to thank you for listening. I tried to speak up earlier, but Mary shut me down. I didn't know what else to do. Justin gave her a small, reassuring nod. You did the right thing by coming forward now, Susan. And that matters. Don't ever let anyone silence you when you know the truth. Jennifer smiled faintly at Susan, squeezing her hand gently. Thank you for standing up when it mattered, she said softly. And Susan's shoulders eased as tears welled in her eyes, her relief palpable. Outside. Gary returned from the gate podium with updated information. Sir, he announced, we've reassigned a replacement crew. Brandon Adams will captain Flight 456, and Anna Scott is stepping in as lead flight attendant. Both have spotless records. Justin nodded approvingly. Good, he said. I want this flight to leave knowing we made things right. The gate agent stepped forward with the intercom microphone in hand, her voice warm and clear as she addressed the waiting passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are pleased to inform you that Flight 456 will resume boarding shortly. Thank you for standing with us during this situation. A cheer rose from the crowd. and passengers began clapping again, the sound carrying down the concourse. Jennifer stood slowly, her hand still in Justin's, and together they walked back toward the boarding door. As she stepped onto the plane once more, a hush fell over the cabin, and then, unexpectedly, passengers began to applaud softly, rising gradually into a standing ovation. The sound was gentle, reverent, a shared acknowledgement of dignity restored. Jennifer's eyes welled with tears she refused to let fall as she nodded gratefully to those around her. Susan, now assigned to continue on the flight as part of the updated crew, stepped forward and whispered, "Welcome back, Mrs. Williams." Jennifer smiled, replying softly, "Thank you, Susan. But just Jennifer is fine." Brandon, the new captain, stood at the front of the cabin and addressed everyone in a calm, measured voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Captain Brandon Adams. We understand the frustration and the delay today. I promise you this, from the moment we take off, your comfort and dignity are our top priorities." A ripple of relieved murmurs spread through the passengers as Jennifer settled back into seat 15B, the very seat from which she had been wrongfully removed less than an hour earlier. Justin leaned close, whispering softly, "You belong here. Never forget that." Jennifer closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, finally letting herself feel the weight of everything around her. The cabin buzzed softly with conversation, strangers leaning across aisles to thank her for standing up, for refusing to back down, for the first time since boarding. Jennifer felt her shoulders relax, the tension lifting ever so slightly. The humiliation had been real, the pain undeniable, but so was the justice that followed. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. And as the cabin doors closed, and the plane began to taxi down the runway under Brandon's steady command, Jennifer knew one thing with absolute certainty. Skyward Airlines would never be the same again. The fallout from the Skyward Airlines incident began within hours, spreading faster than anyone inside Gate C-12 could have imagined. By the time Flight 456 touched down safely in Dallas, the story had already gone viral, dominating social media platforms and making national headlines. Passenger videos of Jennifer being escorted off the plane, her voice calm but steady as she said, "This is discrimination," had been viewed over 2.7 million times by the next morning. Hashtags like #FlyWithDignity, #SkywardScandal, and #JusticeForJennifer trended across X, TikTok, and YouTube, turning what started as one woman's humiliation into a nationwide conversation about bias, dignity, and accountability in air travel. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, showing clips of the confrontation between Mary and Jennifer, the moment Susan bravely stepped forward to defend her, and Justin Baker's explosive arrival at the gate. On talk shows and news panels, experts debated policies around passenger removals, while everyday travelers flooded comment sections with their own stories of discrimination on flights. Skyward's corporate inbox was overwhelmed, with more than 6,000 emails from customers demanding answers and promising boycotts if changes weren't made behind the scenes. Justin Baker and Gary Young moved quickly, releasing an official statement within 24 hours. Skyward Airlines apologizes unreservedly to Mrs. Jennifer Williams and to every passenger impacted by the events of Flight 456. The statement read, "We have terminated the employees involved and are implementing immediate reforms to ensure this never happens again. Discrimination in any form has no place on our aircraft." The public response was swift, mixed with outrage but also cautious hope that real change might finally come. But while Skyward fought to rebuild its reputation, the personal consequences for those involved were devastating. Mary Smith, the lead flight attendant at the center of the scandal, went from respected veteran to public pariah overnight. Her face, captured clearly in dozens of passenger videos, circulated across social media with captions labeling her the face of Skyward's bias. Within a week, she was officially terminated, her 20-year career gone in an instant. She tried applying to other airlines but faced rejection after rejection. Her name was now flagged across multiple HR systems. Her professional reputation effectively destroyed, at first. She lashed out online, posting defensive comments on Facebook claiming she followed procedure and was being sacrificed for optics. But those posts backfired, drawing even more criticism from the public and former colleagues who publicly called her out for ignoring Susan's warnings and mishandling the situation. By the end of the month, Mary was working at a small diner near Midway Airport, a far cry from the career she once had, where regulars occasionally whispered behind her back, recognizing her from the videos. Captain Jack Evans faced his own reckoning, though he tried to defend his actions, claiming he trusted his crew. The FAA launched an internal review after Skyward reported the incident to regulators. Investigators concluded that Jack failed to exercise independent judgment as captain, prioritizing convenience over passenger rights. His commercial pilot license was suspended for 6 months, effectively grounding him, unable to fly. He took a temporary position teaching flight simulations at a small aviation training center. But colleagues who once admired him now kept their distance. Interviews with the media offered little redemption, as every attempt to shift blame onto Mary only painted him as a weak leader who refused to take responsibility. "I just did what captains do," he told one reporter, his voice weary and defensive. "I backed my crew, but the world had already judged him. And this time, loyalty wasn't enough to save his career." Jerry Parker, the security guard who had grabbed Jennifer's arm, struggled in the aftermath too, while he wasn't formally charged with misconduct. Skyward placed him on a no-hire list, and word quickly spread among airport security contractors nationwide. Within weeks, Jerry was forced to take a job working odd hours as a warehouse guard, his income dropping by nearly half. In a rare interview, he admitted quietly, "I should have asked questions. I should have paused. I thought I was doing my job, but I see now I failed her." He became withdrawn after the incident, avoiding social gatherings with his former colleagues and neighbors, haunted by the image of Jennifer's tear-filled eyes as she was escorted off the plane. Karen Martinez, however, faced the most public backlash of all. The viral videos had captured her smug expressions, her exaggerated claims, and even audio from the cabin surveillance confirming her mocking Jennifer before boarding. Her face became instantly recognizable, and within days, internet sleuths dug up details about her business, a small interior design firm in Naperville. Negative reviews flooded her company's page. Clients canceled contracts, and sponsorships were pulled. At first, Karen doubled down, giving an interview where she insisted she only reported what she experienced. But when the cabin audio became public, revealing her comments about people like her and premium spaces, she was roasted online, losing nearly all credibility. Within 3 months, her business collapsed, forcing her to sell her suburban home and move in temporarily with her sister. In a later podcast appearance, she tried to issue a public apology, saying, "I didn't realize how my words came across, but it rang hollow. The damage was done." For Jennifer, though, the days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotion. Strangers from across the country reached out to express their support, sharing their own stories of facing quiet humiliations no one talked about. Jennifer's name became a symbol of resilience, but she remained humble, declining most interview requests and choosing to focus on her work in community advocacy. "This was never just about me," she said softly in the one interview she did give. "It's about what happens when people are judged before they're even seen. I want something good to come out of this." Her words resonated deeply, sparking broader conversations about racial bias in air travel across the U.S. and forcing airlines nationwide to re-examine their policies. Under Justin Baker's leadership, Skyward Airlines became the center of reform. Within a month, the company launched its Dignity in the Skies initiative, a multi-million-dollar program that mandated bias awareness training for all employees. From executives to baggage handlers, every passenger removal would now require supervisor approval and video verification, preventing unilateral decisions like the one Mary made. In addition, Justin created a diversity and passenger advocacy task force, with Jennifer playing an advisory role, ensuring the voices of customers were directly included in policy changes. The reforms weren't just surface-level fixes, they were designed to rebuild trust. And slowly, Skyward began regaining customer confidence. Meanwhile, Susan Miller's bravery didn't go unnoticed. In a company-wide email, Justin personally commended her for choosing truth over silence, and within 6 months, she was promoted to full flight attendant status, skipping the usual probationary period. Passengers on Susan's future flights often recognized her from the videos and thanked her for speaking up, something she accepted humbly but with quiet pride. "I didn't do it for attention," she said in one interview. "I did it because it was the right thing." 6 weeks after the incident, Justin and Jennifer attended a press conference at Skyward's Dallas headquarters, where Justin addressed reporters directly. "This isn't just a Skyward problem," he said firmly, his hand clasped around Jennifer's. "This is an industry-wide issue, and we're committed to leading change. Every passenger deserves respect, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or what seat they're in." The statement was met with applause, not just from the press but from hundreds of Skyward employees watching live from around the world. For many, Flight 456 became a turning point, a painful incident that forced an entire industry to confront its blind spots. And though Jennifer had endured humiliation that no one should ever face, her grace and strength transformed her into a symbol of dignity and quiet power. Justin knew there was still work to do, but he also knew something fundamental had shifted, not just for Skyward Airlines, but for every airline in America watching closely. The entire country now had its eyes on them, and there was no going back. 6 months after the incident on Flight 456, Jennifer Williams stood on a brightly lit stage at the National Aviation Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C., looking out over an audience of more than 1,000 people, airline executives, policymakers, civil rights leaders, and passengers whose lives had been touched by her story. Her soft yet steady voice carried across the silent room as she said, "This was never just about me. This was about dignity, about being seen, about standing up when it's easier to stay quiet." The crowd erupted into applause, some rising to their feet, their faces lit with respect and admiration. In the months since that cold February morning at Chicago O'Hare, Jennifer's story had become bigger than one woman, bigger than one flight, and even bigger than Skyward Airlines. What began as a humiliating injustice had transformed into a national reckoning about bias and accountability in air travel. And Jennifer, once an ordinary passenger on her way to a charity event, had become the quiet force at the center of it all. Skyward Airlines, under Justin Baker's leadership, didn't just recover from the scandal, it became the industry standard for inclusivity and respect. The Dignity in the Skies initiative had expanded into a comprehensive, nationwide program adopted by 6 major airlines within the first quarter, with mandatory anti-bias and passenger rights training implemented for over 18,000 employees. Policies had changed dramatically. No passenger could be removed without direct supervisor authorization, full documentation, and body cam or cabin video review. Every complaint now required verification before escalation. For the first time in decades, passenger rights were at the forefront of aviation reform, and Skyward had set the bar higher than anyone thought possible. The ripple effect didn't stop there. Jennifer was invited to speak at universities, civil rights forums, and corporate leadership events, where her words consistently reminded audiences of the power of grace under pressure. Dignity isn't something you earn. She told one crowd at Harvard Law School, "It's something you're born with. And when we forget that, we fail not just individuals, we fail society." Her talks went viral, amassing millions of views across social media, while hashtags like #DignityFirst and #JenniferWilliamsEffect became rallying cries for change across multiple industries, from hospitality to banking to healthcare, even beyond aviation. Companies began reassessing how they handled customer complaints, employee authority, and bias awareness. Jennifer's influence had spread far beyond that single gate at O'Hare. Skyward Airlines' reputation, once teetering on collapse, soared higher than ever before. Customer satisfaction scores jumped by 42% within 6 months, and bookings increased by nearly 30% compared to the previous year. Analysts called it the largest brand redemption in modern aviation history. Passengers flocked to Skyward not just for its service, but because it had become a symbol of fairness, empathy, and accountability. Susan Miller, the young trainee who bravely stood up for Jennifer on that plane, became the face of Skyward's new training campaign, appearing in videos and conferences encouraging employees to choose courage over silence. Promoted twice in 6 months, she now mentored new recruits, teaching them not just the procedures of their job, but the importance of empathy and listening. "Speaking up was scary," Susan said in a recent interview, her voice warm but proud. "But I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because doing what's right is always worth it." Meanwhile, the antagonists faced lasting consequences. Mary Smith, the former lead flight attendant, had faded into obscurity, her reputation permanently damaged by her actions and the viral videos. Captain Jack Evans quietly retired after his license was reinstated, choosing never to return to commercial aviation. Jerry Parker, the security guard, eventually issued a public apology on social media, acknowledging his mistakes and later volunteering for Skyward's new passenger advocacy task force to help prevent similar incidents. Even Karen Martinez, after months of backlash and business loss, recorded a public video statement admitting wrongdoing and expressing regret, though for many, her words came too late. Through it all, Jennifer remained grounded, focused on her true passion, serving her community. The charity event she was traveling to on the day of the incident had grown tenfold, raising over $1.2 million in funding for underserved children in Chicago, with Skyward's support. Jennifer launched the Williams Initiative, a foundation dedicated to equity and inclusion in both education and travel. Partnering with universities and nonprofit organizations, the initiative provided scholarships, mentorship programs, and advocacy for minority travelers. Her work was recognized by the NAACP, which honored her with its Courage in Leadership Award, and her story was featured in Time magazine's annual list of 100 most influential people for Justin Baker. The incident forever reshaped how he viewed leadership. At an investor summit later that year, he reflected on that February day, saying, "Policy without empathy is dangerous. Authority without accountability is dangerous. My wife taught me that dignity must always come before procedure." His words resonated across the industry, inspiring other airline CEOs to implement similar reforms. Looking back now, Jennifer often said she never expected her quiet resistance on that plane to ignite such a movement. But in her heart, she knew it wasn't just her voice that changed things. It was the voices of everyone who spoke up. From Susan's trembling courage to the retired veteran Jerry's insistence on fairness to the millions of strangers online who demanded better. "One voice can start a ripple," she told a packed audience in Dallas. "But it takes all of us to make a wave." Today, when passengers board a Skyward Airlines flight, they see Jennifer's influence everywhere. Updated training manuals, improved reporting systems, diversity initiatives, and video messages about passenger rights. And for those who know the story of Flight 456, there's an unspoken reminder woven into every boarding announcement, every friendly greeting at the cabin door, every safety demonstration delivered with genuine care. Dignity is not optional. Jennifer's story began with humiliation and pain, but it ended with hope, accountability, and systemic change. Her quiet strength transformed an airline, inspired a nation, and reminded the world that doing the right thing often starts with one person refusing to be silent. And as she walked off the stage that day in Washington to a standing ovation, hand in hand with Justin, she smiled softly, knowing something profound. What happened on Flight 456 would never happen the same way again. Not on Skyward Airlines, and not on any airline bold enough to follow its lead. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next drama.